Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, speaking on behalf of the group of friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has the honor to take the floor on behalf of the group of friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations. Mr. President, what remains of 2023 looks set to be a year with great challenges for the global agenda. We are cognizant of the current multifaceted crisis facing the world. There is the economic and financial crisis, inflation on a global scale, unequal food production and distribution, rising energy prices, the high cost of post-COVID reconstruction, and the threat of new pandemics. We're also seeing increasing natural disasters due to climate change. All of the above exacerbate human suffering and accentuate poverty and exclusion. All of this comes with an alarming increase in the implementation, application, and expansion of the scope of unilateral coercive measures. These ultimately threaten multilateralism as a whole. All of these tragedies have human origins. There is a lack of dialogue and cooperation at the core of these tragedies, and these tragedies are also the result of selfish interests prevailing. The only possible way to overcome these challenges is by consolidating a solid tradition of a culture of peace and solidarity. Doing that will lead to peaceful coexistence, the respect for differences, and mutual attempts to accommodate each other in the fight against common challenges. The member states of our group of friends believe that the promotion of a culture of peace must consequently be an absolute priority in our common endeavors. The meaning and intrinsic values of that culture of peace compel us as states and other global actors to actively promote and encourage the creation of spaces in which we can build political trust. And these values also compel us to consolidate a truly inclusive economic order and development. We must also actively promote dialogue based on mutual respect, tolerance, peaceful coexistence, active non-violence, intercultural and interreligious dialogue, and we must implement policies that foster more egalitarian and equitable societies in which policies of inclusion to benefit those potentially most vulnerable are put into place. We must guarantee broader and greater access to health and education. Health and education must always be conceived as a human right and not as a commodity. We must guarantee a world without hunger and achieve a truly just and equitable new international order. An order without racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, without extremism or any other form of intolerance. We must usher in a new world order in which people live in permanent harmony with nature, an order in which cultural diversity is both embraced and granted the status of a historically valuable entity because it enriches and strengthens our societies. Mr. President, the culture of peace is synonymous with and encompasses inter alia, the self-determination and sovereignty of our peoples, their egalitarian economic and social development, human rights without distinction made according to class or categories, and it involves working without politicization, weaponization, or double standards of any kind. The culture of peace also encompasses universal social justice, health and education for all, non-interference in internal affairs, cultural diversity, and involves believing in a world based on the values and ideals that inspired the establishment of the United Nations. These are values which today are at risk of being diluted by extremist tendencies. Against this backdrop, we take this opportunity to reject the hegemonist and unilateral policies which affect international peace, security, and stability. These policies are implemented in a clear attempt to threaten the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. They are implemented in order to undermine efforts underway towards the democratization of international relations and the strengthening of a multilateralism and of a multipolar system. This is a system which is based inter alia on mutual respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, as well as on the respect for the principle of equal rights and the self-determination of peoples, the rule of law, diplomacy, political dialogue, tolerance, peaceful coexistence, respect for diversity, inclusion, a culture of peace and non-violence, and due consideration for existing differences. All of these values are essential if we are to constructively and effectively work together on issues of common interest and concern. It is the staunch conviction, Mr. President, of the group of friends that in order to achieve these great value-based aspirations, it is vital to promote, preserve, and staunchly defend the purposes and principles enshrined in the UN Charter. We must do this on the basis of a spirit of inclusivity, respect for national sovereignty, for the legal equality of states, for the peaceful resolution of disputes, social progress, and for the promotion of a revitalized and truly inclusive multilateralism. Consequently, it is for us an international political priority to defend the institutional essence provided by those tenets of our founding charter. These are tenets which have preserved global peace over the last 77 years. These tenets are currently subject to systematic attacks waged by those who insist on weakening the multilateral system, including the United Nations. At the same time, they seek to foster instead unilateral practices and tendencies. As such, we believe that it is only with the promotion of CBMs and continued constructive and genuine dialogue between all actors in society, it is only in that way that it will be possible to build and sustain the foundations that will ultimately lead us to establish a peaceful and prosperous world for current and future generations. Climate change, endemic poverty and inequality, uncontrolled human mobility, transnational organized crime and terrorism, for example, will never be overcome without vigorous, dynamic multilateralism. Multilateralism in which exceptionalist and unilateral agendas are dismantled, bearing in mind that these scourges do not know any borders, nor do they spare elites from their dramatic consequences. Consequently, global awareness and consciousness of the need for dialogue and understanding between cultures, political ideologies, religions, civilizations that will lead us to a real and sustained peace based on justice and coexistence is urgently needed. Mr. President, the culture of peace is based inter alia on the sovereign equality of states. States are the international actors par excellence in the promotion of dialogue and cooperation among nations. Consequently, it is vital and we must without delay repeal any unilateral coercive economic or political measures which affect the individual and collective rights of millions of people. They increase poverty and inequality, restrict access to essential goods, and foster perpetual wars and conflict in contravention of the very tenets contained in the UN Charter. They must be repealed. Moreover, we believe it is urgent to actively counter disinformation, counter-information, and hate speech. In recent times, these have been used by unscrupulous groups to sow discord, social conflict, and incite permanent anxiety. This is done through the dissemination of fake news, the exacerbation of ideological or religious differences, and by the promotion of attacks against potentially vulnerable groups and sectors. Those actions create a breeding ground for violent extremism leading to terrorism and for the promotion of expressions of fascism, Nazism, neo-Nazism, and racial supremacy, as well as discrimination against Africans, Asians, and their descendants. All of the above are extremist ideologies that we thought had already been overcome by humankind long, long ago. To conclude, Mr. President, our group of friends reaffirms its commitment to continue working towards the creation of formulas and effective means to combat intolerance. We're also committed to continue working with the United Nations in order to promote the values and the effective implementation of the Declaration and Programme of Action on a Culture of Peace. We remain committed, moreover, to resolutely promoting intercultural and interreligious dialogue, as well as active non-violence. We are committed to condemning hate speech and to continuously, decisively promoting dialogue and a diplomacy of peace. These are concrete means with which we will achieve the ideal of a world in which genuine coexistence reigns. This is an ideal that we will never give up on, despite the adversities of today's world. Many thanks indeed.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.